Good morning, ladies, and welcome to our Torah with the Takeaway weekly class. We are now doing something that's popular demand. I do it every year because I just can't control myself. It is just so beautiful. Rabbi Brevda Zatzal, who was a prime disciple of Rav Chatzkel Levenstein, he was an American who became a very big gadol in his own right. Had an ancestor by the who wrote a sefer in the time of the Vilna Gaon called the Yosef Lekach, and the Vilna Gaon felt his parish on Megillas Esther was the true parish, and not only that, Rav Steinman Zatzal in our more closer age, he also said that this is the way to learn Megillas Esther. So Rabbi Brevda, I've done this, I don't know how many years already, but I keep coming up with some new things. I discovered some things this year that I wanted to mention. But there is so much to say in Megillas Esther, so we have to have 3 classes on it. I hope you all have your Megillas handy because we will be taking up the Megillah. Now, today we do a little bit of an intro for a while, and then we go into it, and hopefully we will finish the Megillah hopefully in 3 sessions, barring any unexpected things, which Hashem could always throw anybody's way. So let's talk about the background of Megillas Esther before we get into it with the parish that Rabbi Brevda brings down. It's interspersed. Sometimes he brings in the Gaon, sometimes it's just his ancestor, the Yosef Lekach. I'm just gonna go with a parish and not to keep quoting back and forth from the different sources. Now, by the way, the Vilna Gaon was a person, this is like late 1600s, who he was considered by his contemporaries as great as a Tana. Now, the Tanaim are the people that wrote in the Mishnah. The Mishnah, if you've ever glanced at it, we have Pirkei Avos that is Mishnah, and Mishnah is very tersely written because you're not allowed to record more than necessary Torah Sheba'al Peh, too much oral law. And then later, if you're the only time you're allowed to is you're afraid it's going to be forgotten. So it was given really at Har Sinai with Moshe, all of our oral law to explain the law. So people would stress themselves out a little bit, trying to learn the Torah and trying to understand what Hashem meant and then come to conclusions. Like Hashem didn't want to spoon feed us our religion. So instead, we were given the oral law in that fashion. And then as over the years, things were forgotten. They had to have the Gemara explaining the Mishnah, and then they had to have the Rishonim, the early commentaries explaining the Gemara. And that's how it went. Well, the Vilna Gaon, although he lived in the 1600s, his commentary is extremely terse and difficult. And Rav Brevda took it upon himself to open it up to the world because he says like 3, 4 words, 5 words, like Rashi kind of, very similar to Rashi. He said he was on that level. He once cried that he wasted 6 minutes of his year wasting time from Torah. And I don't know what he considered he did for 6 minutes. That was so terrible. But this is a man that lived and breathed what the Torah wants from him at any moment. His spiritual level was very high, and so was his writings. But Rebbe, his whole mission was to, he specialized in the Vilna Gaon's writings. And this is this is going to become a totally different Megillah. Those of you who've been here in the past know that we're going to see a whole different Megillah emerging from this year that we didn't know of before. And we, of course, have to learn the Megillah on a higher level because Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal once said, just like an adult would not fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis, wearing a 3-year-old's beged, wearing a 3-year-old's tzitzis because they don't fit him anymore. We can't learn the Torah assuming we know the story because this is a story we heard, when we were children. In fact, the Purim story we'll see is quite different and has a lot of relevance, especially in Gullus. This is the Gullus Megillah. Okay, so with that, let's start the background. Okay, so our first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, a very evil man, right? And the king of Bavel, the Babylonian king. And when the first temple was destroyed, Yirmiyahu Navi, Jeremiah the prophet, prophesied that in 70 years, it will be rebuilt. But in the meantime, it will not be rebuilt. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was a very cruel person. He instilled terror in all his subjects. They said that when he was the despot that he was, when he was reigning over all the countries he was ruler over, he no one smiled during his time, during his reign. That's how terrified they were of him. They said he looked like a ball. He was very fat and very short, and he looked like a ball when he walked around. Now, what happened to Nebuchadnezzar was his own children. He had a son named Evil Merodach, and his son Evil was terrified of him, absolutely petrified of his own father. In fact, he had him imprisoned a few times. So, because he was paranoid, if someone's going to take over for me all the time, always worried what people are going to think of himself. So therefore, he was like always imprisoning people. He also enjoyed, if there was a country that he would conquer, he would like to see his opponent on the other side terrorized in front of him. Like he'd love to see torture going on, that people would be tortured, and he wanted to watch every minute of it. It was the best late night television show that he ever saw. He also ate Aver Min Achai. This was, he was a person that would take a rabbit and, like, I don't want to get graphic, but whatever. He was not afraid to eat, a live animal like that was being destroyed. The Jews during the time were very terrified of him. He built statues of himself all over the place. In fact, one of the statues he put the Urim V'Tumim, that was like a parchment that was in the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol. And he took that, and I'm sorry, it wasn't in the tzitz, it was in the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. Mixing up another thing we're going to say. So in the breastplate, he took the Urim V'Tumim, which was always provided deep messages to the Jewish people. And in one of his idols, he put this Urim V'Tumim, and it was able to speak. So it looked like it had miraculous powers. But meanwhile, what he was really doing was, showing everyone that he was this, terrifying person with godlike qualities. Like he considered himself a god. There's no question about it. The Jews were so terrified of this that many of them succumbed and bowed down to the idol, which is one of the 3 cardinal sins the Jews never allowed to do, but they did it out of terror. Now, we can't, judge anybody that did things like this, but obviously you're not allowed to, no matter what. It's one of the 3 cardinal sins you're supposed to be killed for rather than to succumb to, because everyone had to prostrate themselves in front of his statues whenever they'd pass a statue. So that was the first faux pas of the Jewish people, that they succumbed to this and bowed down to Nebuchadnezzar's idol. Now, he also with his son Evil Merodach, when he was finally Nebuchadnezzar was finally murdered by his own people. And this is not so far-fetched. This is a very common thing, like all throughout world history. When somebody reigns through terror, people can't wait to get rid of them. As soon as somebody gets strong enough, like that's not the way to rule. If you rule through love and people respect you, then you can maintain your leadership. But if you're going to do it through terror, people can't wait to get rid of you, and and then you're down and not up. So this is in fact what happened to him. And then his son Evil Merodach was told, your father has been murdered. You are the new ruler. You're the son, the oldest son. He was terrified. He demanded they show him his father's body in the coffin. They had to unearth the coffin. He did not want to rule until he would see that his father was indeed dead, because people could not believe someone like Nebuchadnezzar could be ever killed. In our day, by the way, Nebuchadnezzar is still so great. I remember this olden days when I used to listen to the radio every once in a while. In 1992, when Saddam Hussein had his whole thing with Kuwait and everything that was going on in those days, the Persian Gulf situation, I overheard that they were mentioning that the elite corps of the Iraqi army. Now, Iraq today is Bavel, and Iran is Paras, which we're going to see later. And there's many of our great Nevi'im even buried in both places, in Iraq and in Iran. In Iraq, we have Yirmiyahu and Navi, and in Iran, we have Daniel and Esther and Mordechai. Any case, so we find that the present day special corps, special, the elite corps. It's almost like the Navy SEALs in America, Lahavdil. I don't know if I say Lahavdil because they're both pretty bad. Anyways, compared to, the Jews. But in any case, the Iraqi army, their unique corps is called the Nebuchadnezzar Corps. It's unbelievable. I heard that. That was the report, that's what they were called. And we're talking thousands of years later. So that's to what degree Nebuchadnezzar really ruled over the entire world at that time. Another thing he did out of his megalomania, and a lot of these leaders are, because why would you want to rule over the whole world? Usually you have like a certain high degree of pride that you want to continually maintain. So you have to lead a country in order to maintain that image that you want for yourself. He had this crazy thing that he wanted all the national treasures of all the countries that were under his dominion. He wanted all their national treasures. What did he do with them? It was like, let's picture like the Mona Lisa or something like that, Michelangelo statues, the best things is before their time. So ancient things, statues and things out of gold and bronze and copper in those days, whatever it was, he was afraid that someone's going to steal it from him. And there were a total of 1,080 artifacts that he had. He decided, he was not far from the Euphrates River where his palace was. He decided he wanted to put all these artifacts in a copper ship. And copper apparently does not float at all. And he let the boat go out a bit, and then the boat sunk, and all those artifacts had to be sunk in order that no one else would have access to these great treasures. If you think about it, it's so stupid. Like if he's already, believing he's going to die, then why does he have to do this? If he's so worried what's going to be afterwards, that they have to be lost forever. He doesn't want his son to inherit it. He didn't want anyone to have these artifacts. He's cognizant of the idea that people die, but he's not cognizant of the fact that he has to give up anything of his own. It shows how the wicked don't really scrutinize and think about, introspect about, their lives and how they're also, fleeting, and they also they're not here forever. And yet, they know this idea, but they don't internalize it at all. It's against understanding. Anyways, what happened is eventually when people rebelled against him, there were two groups of people, the Persians and the Medites, Paras and Madai. Those two groups of people got together and they rebelled against the Babylonians and took over the whole world. That was the next empire after the Babylonian Empire. The first of the kings was ruled for a short time. He was called Darius, not the Mede, but the first Darius. He ruled for a very short time. Then came the Koresh the Great, Cyrus the Great, who was quoted extensively in Sefer Ezra. And what happens over there? We find that in, Koresh, the first Koresh made a decree. He made a decree that the Jews can rebuild their Beis Hamikdash and they could come back home to Israel. They don't have to be dispersed anymore and exiled, and that they can, and that's it. That they could come back home and they can build their temple. Now, truthfully, I just learned something new this year, that he didn't just do this for the Jews. He did this for any nation with their idols and their temples and everything. They can all come back to their home countries under his rule. So it wasn't just exclusively a Jewish mandate, but it was a mandate that everybody had rights. They were able to come back and rebuild their homeland and their temples, rather, and their, the place of worship and this kind of thing. So they started building the Beis Hamikdash. They started the foundation in the time of Koresh the Great. However, two things took place. Number one, there were some people say it was Bnei Haman. Some people spoke against the Jews and said they were trying to really rebel. The fact that they were going to leave, go back to Israel, they're going to rebel against the Persian and Medes, which again, Persia is Iran for today. So when everyone ever tells you I'm Persian, that means they're Iranian. In any case, especially if it's a non-Jew. Anyways, so so they went against went to they went to they told against that the Jews were rebelling. He got very nervous. Another thing they said that people were reporting that there were business losses. Apparently, commerce, as soon as Jews come to any country, we all know all about it, the commerce goes up. And what happened was, as soon as he announced that he was going to be, built, that they're going to go home to their homeland, many Jews went back to Israel, and then the commerce in Iran, Persia went down. So he thus, for those two reasons, the fact that he heard that maybe they're rebellious and that he saw commerce going down in his local country, he stopped in like there were some Jews that got by that made it to Eretz Yisrael, but there were many Jews that didn't make it. And plus the fact they stopped building the temple. So he had to rescind his decree. But guess what? We learned, first lesson we're going to learn from all this, we're starting off with this historical background, just so you get a background of the whole thing. But the interesting thing here is that first lesson that we learn is that even the smallest thing a person does is rewarded by Hashem, and no small deed is left unpaid. We see some Nazis that made it to Paraguay after World War II, because maybe they once did a good turn to a Jew, they got to live, a few more years afterwards. Also, not to get olam haba, but that's beside the point. But Koresh, because he did permit the Jews to go build the Beis Hamikdash, guess what happened? In his lifetime, there were scuba divers, and they found out that, lo and behold, when they were doing their scuba diving, they found this copper ship outside of Iran, outside of Persia, and they unearthed 1,080 treasures, the treasures that Nebuchadnezzar had tried to hide. They discovered them, and that's what happened in the time of Koresh the Great, that he was rewarded for this great deed of his, that he allowed the Jews to start building the Beis Hamikdash, at least starting, even though it was within, everybody else's rights, and that he also allowed some of them to go to Eretz Yisrael. He was given a reward in his lifetime. Anyways, so now, after Koresh, by the way, one more thing I forgot to mention is that, remember we said that Yirmiyahu said there's going to be 70 years. And that's a whole dispute about these 70 years. And especially now that we're going to be speaking about the Persian Empire, the question is, when do the 70 years end? So we will see there was either a dispute because there were two waves of immigrants, either the Choresh Umaskir, the really important Jews like the Kohanim and the Leviim and the Nasi and all the important Nevi'im and all the important people. They exited Israel first, and then only later the common people went. And I believe it was like 17, 18 years difference between the two waves, and thus it coincided with stage one. Koresh started rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash, is like the 70 years beginning, and then we're going to see the other 70 years is a little bit later. In any case, and the truth was that finally the temple is rebuilt 70 years after even the second wave. That's why Achashverosh got a little bit confused. He thought he could celebrate with a party. One of the reasons, according to some of the Meforshim, is that he felt that he could have this whole mishta, this whole party, because there's no hope for the Jews ever to rebuild the temple. The 70 years are long gone, which they were according to the first opinion, but not according to the second opinion. There was still time left, and that's why he erred in making that calculation. They say he wore the clothes of the Kohen Gadol, and that he had maybe some vessels there from the Beis Hamikdash, but he was really making a big mistake. Now, the Jews were now under Persian rule. And we have the first king after Koresh was, after he died, he did not have an heir. And there was a whole problem, who would be the next king? And this is where Achashverosh and the story of Purim comes in. Either he was called Xerxes the Eighth or Artashasta, one of those two things. And finally, the temple is rebuilt by his son. Darius the Mede was the son of Esther. And Daryavesh, that Daryavesh is the one that Ezra and Nehemiah came back and they rebuilt, they completed the building of the Beis HaMikdash during his reign, which was later. And that coincided with, we said, with the second wave of immigrants, or just coincide. That was, that was the way it was supposed to be, with the two waves of one. Some people say it's a different opinion. Some people say the first of the 70 years was from the rise of Bavel until the rise of Bavel was 70 years before, taking over Eretz Yisrael and everything, 70 years before the time of Koresh, and the destruction of the temple was 70 years of the time of Daryavish. So that all coincided, all these calculations, and we don't even have to be math experts. Hashem worked it all out in the end for all the different calculations. No matter who you go by, that's how it jives. Now, Achashverosh was not, now we're going to open up our Megillas. We're going to start going through, today we're going to do the first parak, the first chapter, and, but we will finish the Megillah. We're just doing the first one because the introduction took time, and we are going to be doing next week, probably Beis and Gimel, and maybe part of Dalet, and then we will go through the Megillah. Okay, now, we find that the whole story of Achashverosh was 12 years, a 12-year reign, that the story of Purim. And the reason we have to hear every word of it is there's so many miracles within the Megillah that if you don't hear every word, you're missing out on miracles, because every little thing that happens, everything has so many components to it. And we'll see how complicated the whole thing really is. It's much more complicated than we learned it as children. So let's take, this was a Persian document. That's the reason why it doesn't have Hashem's name in it. Or it's because Hashem just hides the whole thing of Hashem, so to speak, looks like he's in hiding during the story of Purim. But afterwards, we find out some amazing, everything just comes together. Okay, and the grave of Esther and Mordechai is in a city called Hamadan in Iran. You can look it up online. You can even see pictures of it or even videos of it. Where they're both, there's a shrine, and they consider it a holy place in the Iranian, empire. And it's people still try to get permission every year from the government to go on the 13th of Adar. They usually go to daven at those kfarim. Okay, first verse. Vayihi, and it was. Always when it says Vayihi, that means we're going to be having some sorrow is about to take place. Bimei Achashverosh, the time of Xerxes the Eighth, or Artaxashta. Which Achashverosh? Achashverosh Hamolech. Achashverosh, who rules, present tense. He rules Mehodu, from India till Ethiopia, 127 countries. Now we're going according to the Yosef Lekach. Other people say, Esther was 127 years old, and Sarimenu lived till 127, and because of Sarimenu, we have an Esther and all that. We're not going there. We're going with new ideas from the Vilna Gaon. Any case, we're told like this. The two questions. Number one, why is Achashverosh mentioned twice in this verse? Achashverosh, who Achashverosh? Repetitive. Secondly, why does it say Hambolech, presently rules? Are we insinuating that people come back? Or that they never died, or things like that? What are we insinuating by saying in present tense Hamolech? So the answer is like this. We must have heard this as children. Achashverosh originally was a stable boy in the Babylonian Empire, and he somehow got into money. Maybe he won the Powerball. I don't know, something. He somehow came into money, or the pious in Israel, whatever you want to call it, even though I think the pious doesn't pay like the Powerball. It's better to put your money in the Americans right now. Any case, right now that is. But any case, so he was not heir to the throne. That's why it says the Achashverosh that rules but not ruled. In other words, he wasn't deserving of ruling. Historically, he didn't deserve to rule. He was in the present. It was like a present moment thing, a temporary lull in between the real heirs to the throne, the royals, people that had, the real money and the real connections. So what happened? Even though he had money, I don't know how much money. I don't know if he's the richest man in the world, like Haman was at one point, but he decided that he was going to get himself up on the social ladder. And he was supposedly, says the parish here, that he was like a genius in social relations, and probably public relations as well, real expert in how to make it big in this world. So he'd have dinner with that one and smoke a cigar with the other one, and have his alcohol, the tequila or whatever, the vodka that people like, whatever it is, he had it with different people until he really made it big. And what happened? He knew how to talk. He, first of all, he got himself somehow married off to Vashti, the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, daughter of Belshazzar. That's already like one claim to the throne, just like Hillary married Bill, just to get like some connection to the throne. Then he started to bribe ministers, like he put money in U.S. aid. He got money from sources and he put it into U.S. aid, and then they gave him kickbacks. And he also could play the stock market because he had kickbacks from different people. He had inside trading, all kinds of information. And he was able to know which stock to invest in because he was in Congress, things like that. Anyways, so they voted him. Eventually, there's no heir to the king. He was voted as king. Incredible. A stable boy becomes king. Now we find that not only does he become king, he decides that there's several things he needs to secure his throne. 3 things to do once he got up there, and he says, I got the wife. Okay, that's a good. It looks really good. I married a Kennedy. Second thing he does is he's decided he has to have his he's got to have like he's got to be like seed in great places. He has to have like this reputation where he's like he's connected with this place and that place, and like he looks like he's really interconnected. So he decides that he has to get himself a throne, like a really classy throne, and not just any throne. He wants the same throne like Shlomo HaMelech had. Shlomo HaMelech, the very famous Jewish king that could have been Mashiach, he wanted to have, he wanted to have all these things, so he figured he's got to have the best. Now, if we look at this like, okay, this guy's crazy. This sounds like modern day America, where money can buy anything. And if you got the backdrop and the looks and the photo op and the hair or whatever it may be to get you somewhere, or some kind of name, you're a name of something, you could be Prime Minister of Canada. You can, all kinds of things can come your way if you just, do that. Third thing he thinks he needs to do is please the populace. Freebies, free university, you give them free Obama phones, you give people things free, you're going to buy out the populace. So those are the 3 things. You need the royalty name, you need the name, you need the backdrop, the connections, and you also need to please the people. Now, so he all of a sudden, instead of a stable boy, he's marrying, he looks like this opulent person all of a sudden. Now, Chazal tell us, Ein hamako mechabed es ha'adam, ela adam mechabed es makomo. Really, a place does not honor the person, but a person honors the place. He had the hashkafa, the philosophy of most people in the world, where if you want to look good, it's all the factors. You got to get all those factors going on your behalf. You got to be seen with Hasidic Rebbes to be able to be a New York senator. You got to, he thinks we believe that you honor a place doesn't honor you. Say, if the backdrops don't count, but he had to have the throne of Shlomo Melech. Now, Shlomo Melech, there's all kinds of miracles that occurred. His throne was made out of gold, but Achashverosh was made out of silver. They wanted to copy it. It had a technology where, as the king would ascend to the throne, at every step, different animals mechanically would come out to meet him. I don't know the order, but I do know on top, the final step, an eagle would come and put the crown on his head, and before he would sit down, like this whole genius. Now, people say, oh, come on, in ancient times, they had this whole thing constructed like that. But the truth is, I once went on a tour with someone that's watching right now, with Rav Pesach Levy. He should be Gesundenstark. He was a great, great tour guide. They should be Gesundenstark, the best tour guide of Eretz Yisrael. He once took us to a place called Megiddo. And Megiddo was the summer palace of Shlomo Melech, central Israel. It was apparently very strategic because it's on a mountain and it was not far from the port cities. And it's a central, like Emek Yisrael area generally. It's Nazareth today in that area. And there were several amazing things done there to protect the king and his kingdom. They tried to drill some water from the source. So since it was like a fortress kind of, they had to have a source of water to sustain themselves. So I remember this just struck with me. It just stuck with me, this idea. He said, they had in this mountain, they had two sets of people carving with using, I forgot what you call them in those days. Like, they have like these thick nails, and they're, okay, all the authors out there will have to comment and let me know what these are called, that you're, through the rock, they're like carving through the rock, from both sides of the mountain, and then they're supposed to meet in the middle. And what happened was one set like did it upwards and the other set did it downwards. And yet, miracle of miracles is they met exactly in the middle when they finally both reached the same place, which is really something. What I mean up or down, I mean the directional of their chiseling, that's the word. They chiseled through this mountain. Now, we find that so half the group chiseled like facing up, but they still were same height. They started at the same height. What was really incredible, though, and then they finally, met in the middle. There was this hole carved out, and they were able to derive the water source. He mentioned to us that the English Channel was built in the 1920s, I believe, the 1910s, or the 20th century. And the English Channel was off. They had also people carving from two sections, and they were 12 inches apart. 12 inches apart in the English Channel, but Shlomo Melech managed to be equal. And it's a miracle. You think about, look at the stones at the Kosel, huge stones. How they transported it is nothing less than spectacular, and didn't break in pieces. It shows that old time, life was not that, was not that primitive as we think it could be. Any case, now they, in fact, Rav Shimon Schwab Zatzal tells us in the Shemona Esrei, we say this prayer every day. Ata chonein la'adam das, you've granted man wisdom. Umalamed la'enosh bina, and you've taught civilization or society understanding. Like bina is to understand deeply things. So he explains something beautiful. He says, what's bina? He says, give an example. I don't remember his example, but I'll give my own. Like, for example, Alexander Graham Bell discovers the telephone. So because he discovered the telephone, later people could make cordless phones. And because of the cordless phones, later people could make cell phones. And then, in other words, society, the way we work in the secular world, is one builds upon another. You can't say you just walked into a room. We're so much brighter than our ancestors because we discovered the cell phone. We needed Alexander Graham Bell, or we'd have no cell phone. In fact, maybe he even made a bigger leap of wisdom than we made in our advancing his idea. I remember Victor Miller says something similar about Cain. Cain had, and Tuval Cain had this ingenuity to make things out of metal for the first time. Do you know how big, or Cain taught people with shepherding or sheep and how to allow sheep to grow and things like that. These are astounding. We minimize what the ancient societies knew. We're just building on them, really, what we're really doing. And who knows which is a bigger step that was taken. Okay, so that's the first pasuk, which is really astounding, that we find that when Achashverosh is mentioned twice, because he's unusual, he was Hamolech. It was the only person, really it wasn't due to him, but he worked his way up to the throne by conniving and bribing and investing and inside stock trading and all kinds of things until he became who he was, although he was a stable boy. And Obama worked in a gift shop and was 2 years in Congress, and that was his claim to fame. And Hitler Yamach Shemo was a wallpaper hanger. So, it's not so far-fetched to realize that you've got such a king. Now, second verse. Kishevas HaMelech, Bayamim Haim, in those days, Kishevas HaMelech Achashverosh, Akisei Malchuso, when the king sat on his throne that was in Shushan Habira, that was in Shushan, the capital. So why do we have to know it's the capital? And what does it mean when he sat on his throne? So what when he sat on his throne? It doesn't say what happened. Let's just go into a little bit of Pasuk Gimel to help us. Bishnas Shalos the Malcho, in the third year of his reign, he made a party to um, all of his officers and servants and all the who's who of the Persians and the Mediites, the Partumim, all the important people and the officials of the countries. Now, what is this idea of the third year? The second, and the sitting on the throne? So here's the deal, according to the Yosef Lekach, it's incredible when you think about it. Why does it say when he sat on his throne? Remember we said he had to have a backdrop. He had to have the throne of Shlomo HaMelech. The only problem is when he tried to commission this and say, okay, the king is looking for someone that's going to reconstruct the throne of Shlomo HaMelech, nobody wanted to do it. Everybody was terrified because if you don't please the king, it's off with your head. In ancient times, at least. They didn't want to have to deal with that. There was this backwater town called Shushan. Really, the capital of the Babylonian Empire, or really the Persian Empire, was called Elam. And that was the name of the capital all the years, the capital city. But when Shlomo, when we find in our story here, when Achashverosh is looking for a throne, the only people that were, they were bumpkins, country bumpkins. They didn't realize the ramifications if they goof. They said, "Okay, we'll try it for the king. We'll make him his throne," and they did it. And it was a city called Shushan, and they actually did it. It took them 3 years. That's why it says in the third year he made the party because he wanted to show everybody off his throne. It took them 3 years to construct it. And when they did, the problem was that they couldn't get it out. They didn't know how to transport it to Elam. They had no way to transport it. So, people told them, maybe you'll just keep Elam as your summer palace. And he said, no, I want my throne. So what did they do? They thought of this brilliant idea, at least the king did. They're going to make the capital city of the entire Persian Empire Shushan, because this way he doesn't have to move his throne. So all the embassies and all the hotels and all the things, all the national museums are all going to have to be transported to Shushan in order that the king should have his throne. So that's why it's called Shushan Habira, because it never was the Bira before. It never was the capital. But we all know the reason why Shushan took such an important place was because Mordechai and Esther happened to live there. And we needed that for our Purim story and for our salvation. So Hashem orchestrated this whole story to take place in Shushan for the very first time. It's really incredible. So in this third year, he made a party for everybody. And in the fourth verse, he shows there are 6 different adjectives used of his fabulous things. He showed Osher, Kavod, Malchuso, Yakar, Tiferes, Gedula. So many days, 180 days he makes a party. If you do the math and you find for 180 days, 6 times 6, it's 1,080. We're told by the Parish here that every day he decided to show these officers a national treasure. I mean, 6 treasures rather. He shows them 6 treasures from the 1,080 that he had from Koresh, from Nebuchadnezzar. So these great, very rare, antique, unique items were being on display for all the officers for 180 days. That's what he did. And when those days were over, Pasuk Hey, the king, verse 5, he showed all the people, whether it was the smallest, any schnook, any baby in arms, or elderly, anybody, he made a 7-day party for all the people of Shushan. And there was rationale in that too. He figured if we're ever attacked or in trouble, the people I need to be the most loyal are the people closest to me. So he wanted to bribe them as well, smear them, make them feel important. So all the people of Shushan were given great honors for 7 days. They had this, so we have altogether 187-day party, 180 for the ministers, and now 7 for the people of Shushan. Where did they make it? If you look at the last few words of this 5th verse, Bechatzar Ginas Bisan Hamelech. They were done in the chatzar, that means the courtyard. Ginas is the garden. Bisan is orchard. So we're told that there were so many people that they in the courtyard, of course, is where they were meant to assemble, but they spilled out into the garden, the king's adjoining gardens, and even as far as the adjoining orchards were outside the gardens. That's how many people were there. The next verse, the 6th verse, we're told all these beautiful different materials used, and they even describes that they had stones, gemstones, put in the floors of the courtyard. People were walking like little janitors were walking on diamonds. This is like Saudi Arabian, it's kind of concept. This is a Middle Eastern thing. It's not new. Dubai, these places, the how they don't mind like just throwing around their diamonds to show how much they have. Now, verse 7, they were given to drink in gold cups and kalim shonim. The Rashi says here that maybe this is even the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash, and a lot of wine to drink, as much as the king had. Now, verse 8, Vashtia kadas ein ones. There was a rule, unspoken rule in those days in the Persian Empire, where to be a man, you had to be able to hold your drink. So there was a das, there was a certain unspoken rule. You drank such and such and you don't fall over, then you're a man. So they gave these big cups the size of whatever it is that shows how manly you are. And so you were given cups that big to drink. The ein ones, but there was no coercion. Nobody forced you to drink it down like they were in the olden days. Like, you have drink it out now and then you're a man. No, they just had those sizes for those who wanted to be macho, and those who didn't were not coerced, because that's what the king established, la'asos kirtzon ish ve'ish, to do every man's bidding. Now, this is an incredible phrase here. Incredible. According to this explanation, la'asos kirtzon ish ve'ish, unbelievable. They said, to do it's some explanations means, according to Haman, he would have been very happy at this party, and even Mordechai would have been very happy at the party because there was kosher food. That's the explanation usually given to kids. But here, the explanation here is interesting. Anybody that knows anything about cooking, and there are people that do, and you usually at a state dinner, there is like one featured item for every course. There may be a second just in case of the people that are gluten-free and this free and that free, but basically there's not a million choices. They even say an idea for people opening restaurants: the less things you have on your menu, the better your menu will be. Because you have too many choices, you can't always accommodate. You order too much, you order too little, you don't have time to cook all those different dishes. Here we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people coming to the city capital, and you could order anything you want. That's incredible, just to please people. This was Mr. Pleasing people. He put stones on the floor to, so people to approve, and he gives them museum artifacts that they can all look at for $6 a day. And now we're talking about, you get whatever you want. You want your eggs over easy. You want filet mignon. You want whatever, veal chops, whatever it is you get. Now you can imagine what's going on in the kitchen. It's total like craziness that the king has such a demand for so many people. It's impossible to accommodate, but they had to do it. Now, verse 9, Gam Vashti Hamalka, also Vashti Hamalka. We're told that sometimes in this Megillah, she's called Hamalka Vashti, the queen Vashti, or sometimes she's called Vashti, the queen. And there is a difference. Every word means something in this Megillah. That's hopefully also what we're trying to develop here. I can't go through every word, or we'll be here for 8 hours, but I'm trying to go through most of the main phrases of the Megillah, so we see that there is deep meaning to everything that's being said. So here it's Vashti. So in other words, she was as beautiful as she was the queen. But it also means another thing. We're told that Ahasuerus started feeling really comfortable in his new role. People were all liking him, all the things he was doing for people, and was accommodating everybody. And this is going off big. Everybody's heavy into drinking. It's a whole thing going on over there. So Vashti, the queen, she's not Hamalka Vashti, but she's Vashti Hamalka. She felt she was being put down a step. Like, king doesn't need me anymore. I'm his claim to fame. What would he do without me? He wouldn't be considered royalty. So she decided that she's going to make her own party. Now he's got his in Chatzar Ginas Bisan Hamelach. Where's she going to make hers? It says in the verse, in Pasuk Tes, Beis Hamalchus. There was a room, a royal room in every palace in ancient times where the king could contemplate. Rabbi Brevda mentioned that in the time of Hitler, Yamach Shemo, Hitler had a room that took 10 minutes to walk until you would reach the leader. That's how big it was. A room where he could contemplate and think of matters. So he was all by himself, and he doesn't have to be, you don't go into that room unless. Meanwhile, since Vashti's royalty, she figured this is going to make a big statement. I'm making the women's party in the adjacent room, which is the king's room, the royal room that belonged to the king. We see some interesting things here. Number one, in ancient times, because women did not mingle with the men. They had their own parties. I remember two women in a shira that I gave told me that in Toronto in the early 1900s, there were separate entrances in public school for boys and girls. And people, of course, wore jackets and hats. In the olden days, like, people really dressed up. There was more modesty displayed. So that's number one. But so she wanted the royal room, but she wanted to be, it was kosher. But we're told by the Medrash that the men here, the women were doing what women do. They were talking. Now, why do women talk? Women talk because it says that women are given 9 measures of speech and men were only given 1. So on one hand, it sounds like women talk much more than men. Some people would say for the most part, maybe that is true. But there is some other things. I once heard someone say, and I don't remember who it was, that women have a thing that women's speech is very much geared to different types of speech. Like, women can comfort, women can empathize. Somebody once told me that she took a social work course. Several months were spent on just how to talk in an empathetic manner. Like, let's say someone says, "Oh, my foot hurts." "Oh, your foot is really inflamed?" Or, "Your foot is really bothering you?" Go on and on and on. Just say it. So the person really feels you've got the message. You really feel with them. In any case, there's different ways of speech, and women have some of these ways of speech. So anyways, so women were all talking, the men hear them, and the Medrash says that they start talking about women. They're a bunch of drunken men. So what are they talking about? Talking about women, and they got into a discussion of which women are more beautiful, which nationalities have the most beautiful women. So Achashverosh answers, for sure, the Babylonian women. They're the most beautiful of all. That's because he was married to one, so he wanted to show her off. So that's why this is connected with the next part, Pasuk Yud, 10th verse. At that day, the 7th day of the Shushan party, when the king is deep into his cups, or as they'd say in Toronto, he's in a drunken stupor, he told 7 advisors. Now, the 7th advisor's name was, no, here it wasn't yet, sorry. He had 7 different advisors that would help him out to bring Vashti Hamalka. Like, he doesn't refer to her first as royal. He refers to her as beautiful, my woman. First she's Vashti, and then she's the Malka, to come for the king with a crown on her head. Obviously nothing else. That was the point of it, to show everybody her beauty because she's beautiful. And in verse 12, Tima'en Hamalka Vashti. Vashti refuses to come. She refused to listen to the king's words. And Vayitzof HaMelech Ma'od, the king was very angry. V'chamasa ba'arabo, and he was fuming inside. His anger was burning in him. Now, why are there 2 expressions used of anger? And why didn't Vashti come? So we know there were two reasons, really. Tima'ain, she refused to come because either she developed boils on her skin or pimples, or she had a tail, or something happened that she wasn't looking. She was having more than a bad hair day, let's put it that way. And so she refused. But she also said another thing, according to she's saying, according to the Vilna Gaon, she said, I can't tell the king this. Here he asked her to come, and she's feeling defensive. So she has to back herself up. She said, she's also angry also because he didn't acknowledge her enough, and that he didn't make accommodations for her enough. So she said, my father could hold so much wine, but you're only the stable boy, and you can't hold wine like my father could. And then she also refused to come because of her looks. Now, so the king was doubly angry. Why? What are the two aspects of anger here? One is Vayiksof HaMelech Ma'od. He was angry. She said that, she's not coming. So he's angry. The second, and we're going to see in the next verse, he's going to discuss it with his ministers what to do about that problem. He does not divulge to his ministers, part 2, about the wine. He doesn't talk about that, about the stable boy part, because that's too embarrassing. You can't talk about that with anyone. He's now this big king. So because of that, he didn't vent that feeling of anger, and it was burning inside of him. That's why he was so fuming angry, mainly because that she referred to him as a stable boy. And that's the part. Now, it's interesting. In the olden days, they had this concept of venting in psychology. Like, it's so healthy to vent. You should like punch on punch bags or something when you're angry. In our Torah world, we believe you should talk about things if you're upset, like get it out, discuss it with somebody. Try, of course, without lashon hara if you can, or if you can even speak to the person, it's good to speak to them and have it out with them. And the worst thing is if you can't talk to somebody, it's very, very, very painful. That's when you really feel much more frustration. But in the Torah, if we'd act out our anger, even though here it says because he held in his anger, he was so fuming. But we believe if we'd act out that anger in any way, it just makes you more angry. Chitzonius moreris es apnimius. The outer feelings is what ends up, affecting the inner aspects of a human being. So that's why we believe that, we're more set on not like acting out anger. We can talk about it, but it's better not to act it out. Now, so what happened? So he goes up, Pasuk Yud Gimel, he consults with his ministers, Yodei Ha'itim. These are people that knew the times. What does that mean? If you know anything about Chappaquiddick, Lahavdil, Teddy Kennedy, who had to first make phone calls and decide what's better for his reputation, whether he should let a woman drown when he accidentally, drove a car into a harbor. So, like some people know, like what's the right way to handle with the press and with how should things look? He wants and consults with them because he wants people to tell him how to act. And in Pasuk Yudalad, he had 7 ministers that are like advisors. Those ministers that are advisors, the last one on the list is Mumuchan. So they have they have these ministers that give him advice. When Muchan, they say, is Haman, because he's preparing himself for his ultimate destruction. He's Muchan, he's prepared for, first he builds it, Lifnei Shever Gaon. He first becomes high and mighty, and then later he's going to fall totally into the depths. Any case, what happens is these 7 people, they see the king, and they're the first advisors. What do you do, Bamalka Vashti? What do you do about this national problem? It's not just Vashti, it's Hamalka Vashti. This could affect, like, how is it going to ruin, my political reputation? That because she didn't do what the king told her to do in the hands of the servants. Now, okay. I have to realize something, and that is that Vashti was something the king did not. He was drunk at the time, but had he been sober or had he been intelligent, he would never have killed Vashti. Vashti was his claim to the throne. It's miraculous how this whole story is playing out. It's exactly what he did not want to do, his the three-step tactic to become king and famous and everything. So Memuchan Haman pipes in. Now, Haman, it's amazing. If you're a senator the first day on the job, you're not going to get up to speak. You're on the job. You're a newbie. You know there's people that are more seasoned than you. You listen for a few days and you have some wisdom on how to address fellow members of Senate. I once taught a group of women, and a lady told me that she had a friend in Montreal who used to go to conferences for women in business. This woman was, into business, and she attended conferences of, business people, especially women, and how they develop their own businesses. And they said this woman sat there for months, never uttering a word, never said a word. And then all of a sudden, months later, she opened this business, and she was the most successful of all of them because she kept quiet. She was listening to everybody else's ideas and keeping her own quiet. She gained much more than anybody else gained, who was talking their head off all the time. They never had time to listen to other people. Memuchan did the same thing. We find that Haman gets up and starts speaking. He doesn't listen to anybody. He doesn't know protocol. He doesn't know anything. He's getting up there and he's saying, well, it's not just the king that she's doing this to, but it's all the officers are going to, reap something from this whole incident, because it's, first of all, women are going to, no one's going to listen to, the hierarchy. And also he adds in his own little gripe. He was an Amaleki, he's from Amalek, and his wife didn't want to speak his language. He said women are not going to have respect for their husbands. That was his own personal thing he threw in for good measure. But one thing he was trying to do here, we're told, was he wanted to initiate a new law, because he's saying, if you look at the words in the pasuk, Loa lamelech levado, not only the king, but all the sarim, because it's going to come. And he says, where am I going to, if you learn Yoches, it says, Kol sarei hamelech, all the officers, all officials are going to be bizayon v'ketzef. They're going to be treated with tremendous scorn. So, and Yotes, it continues and says another phrase, if the king agrees, Yetzei devar malchus milfanav. The word of rulership should be in front of him. What does that mean? Vilna Gaon says, unbelievable. He wanted to initiate a new rule. Until now, in ancient times, a king was allowed to be omnipotent. He had any powers available to him. He could, totally whatever he wants goes, except when it was a matter of something personal, he'd have to consult and have to get permission, let's say, of whatever ruling body there was, be it parliament or whatever, because this is not a national matter or an international matter, it's a private matter. You hear that, Hillary Clinton? Bill. Any case, but so he said like this. So until then, if the king had a private matter, that's why Haman is approaching this as this is an international matter, that this is a national matter, international matter, so it has to be treated as such, number one. And number two, from now on, the king should have total omnipotence in all affairs, because who says that a king's private life is not public, doesn't have any relevance to his public life? It sure does. It has a lot of relevance. There could be spies, there could be all kinds of things. So for this reason, he says king should have total power. And believe it or not, all the officers agreed to this. Unbelievable that now the officers are diminishing their own powers. And also, from now on, Haman is just brought his own downfall. When the king says, hang him on the tree, that's it. Just at will, he could say that. And Haman's the first one to have this happen to him in our story. It's unbelievable. So they went around running around saying that from now on, women have to respect their husbands and do whatever they say. And also, all government officials cannot be put down, and the king has total dominion. So that finishes up our first chapter. We find all these miracles, for any miracle, just to sum it up quickly, from the spoils of Koresh that received Nebuchadnezzar's spoils, and he meant to hide it. And look, it was ended up being revealed in his reward from building the base of Mikdash. How Achashverosh goes to so many ends to please the people and to have a queen by his side, and he ends up killing that very queen that's supposed to give him this fantastic look. And then we find also all these various miracles that Shushan has to become the capital because of the throne, and they have to move the throne, and that it worked, that they had such a throne. It's unbelievable. And Ritzon Ish Ve'isha, he was a tremendous, tremendous people pleaser. And that's supposed to be indicative. That's not a Jewish trait. That's an Achashverosh trait. So when we make and start planning our Shalach Manas, let's keep in mind, if we enjoy doing certain things, fine. But if it gets to the point that we're just afraid of what people are going to think of us, that's employing Achashverosh's technique, not our technique. I thank you for listening. I thank Rivka for sharing this, and Debbie for all her efforts, and all of you for listening. I'm going to turn off the recording, and hopefully, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much.